They say growing old teaches you patience, but no one tells you how it feels to be left behind in your own home. For 50 years, I built that house with my hands, every nail, every beam, every memory. And then one winter night, while I sat by the fire, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper words I'll never forget. "We'll kick him out after Christmas." I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just listened, and something inside me went very still. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about silence, the kind that follows when love turns into something colder than snow. It's about a father who built a home, and learned too late that peace isn't a place you live, it's something you carry when you finally learn to let go. I was pouring myself a second cup of coffee when I heard her whisper. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "We'll kick him out after Christmas." Those 6 words slipped through the air like a knife through soft fabric. Quiet, but sharp enough to tear something that had taken me 70 years to hold together. Family. The voice belonged to my daughter-in-law, Emily. And though she said it under her breath, just low enough for my son to hear, she must have known the old farmhouse carried sound like memory through the vents, the hallways, the floors that creaked with every step of our lives. I was in the kitchen, halfway between getting cream from the fridge and pretending not to exist. They were in the living room, a few steps away, talking over the sound of a Christmas movie playing too softly to matter. I didn't hear what my son replied. Maybe he said nothing. Maybe silence was easier. But my hand froze around the handle of the mug, and for a moment the coffee stopped steaming. People think heartbreak always arrives with shouting or slammed doors. But sometimes it arrives like that, whispered in another room, covered by the sound of a holiday movie, wrapped in the comfort of normal life. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet tick of the wall clock that had been there since my wife, Clara, was alive. She used to say time has a sound when you're alone. She was right. That night, I sat through dinner the way an actor might sit through his final scene, smiling when expected, nodding at the right words, all while something inside quietly folded itself up. Emily laughed at something on her phone. My son, Nathan, asked me how the old truck was holding up. I said it was fine. I didn't mention that the engine coughed more than it roared these days, or that I hadn't had the energy to fix it in weeks. I was tired, not in my body, but somewhere deeper. It's a kind of tired you can't sleep off. They stayed the night in the guest room upstairs, like they always did when they visited for the holidays. I heard them walking above me as I lay in bed, light footsteps, then a door closing, then silence, silence that felt like the final page of something I hadn't realized was ending. When I closed my eyes, I remembered the day Nathan was born. How small he looked wrapped in the blue hospital blanket. How Clara cried softly when the nurse handed him to her. She whispered, "He's going to change our world, Frank." And he did. He was our only child. Our late blessing, our reason to get up and try again when life got heavy. When Clara passed away 5 winters ago, Nathan promised me he'd visit often, and he did at first. But time has a way of building walls made of busyness, and eventually those walls grew taller than promises. Calls got shorter, the visits fewer, and I told myself it was natural. Children grow. Lives change, distance happens. But deep down, I think I always knew what was coming. People say you can't lose family. That blood is unbreakable, but blood can grow cold if left too long untouched. The next morning, Emily came down first. She was dressed nicely, as always, hair perfect, nails done, phone in her hand before she even said good morning. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile people use when they pass strangers in a grocery store aisle. Polite, empty, sleep well? I asked, like a rock. She said, scrolling through her messages. Nathan's still upstairs. He said to tell you he'll be down in a bit. I nodded and went back to my newspaper, pretending to read, but the words on the page were just black shapes swimming in a sea of white. She poured herself coffee, added too much sugar, and took a sip. Then she looked around, like someone inspecting a house that wasn't quite good enough for the market. "You know," she said casually, "this place would sell fast. All this land, the trees, the view, it's beautiful. You could make a good profit. I folded the newspaper. It's not for sale." She smiled again. "Of course not. I was just saying, houses like this are rare now. People love that rustic charm." Rustic charm, that's what they call old age when it happens to wood and brick. When it happens to people, they just call it inconvenience. I didn't respond, and she didn't need me to. She just sipped her coffee, looked out the window, and said softly, "We'll have to figure things out soon." Later, when Nathan came down, his eyes were tired, like he hadn't slept. He gave me a hug, half-hearted, but familiar enough to almost fool me. We talked about his work, his new car, the stress of city life. I told him about the neighbor's dog that kept digging up my garden. Small talk, the kind that fills air but never hearts. After breakfast, they packed their things. Emily said they'd be back for Christmas Day. I told them I'd bake Clara's old apple pie. Nathan smiled, though I could tell he'd already forgotten the taste of it. When their car disappeared down the dirt road, I stood on the porch long after the dust settled. The air smelled like frost and pine. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that makes you want to light a fire and remember better days. That's what I did. I sat in Clara's old chair, the one by the window, and watched the sun fade behind the trees. The fire cracked softly. I thought about what Emily said and what she whispered. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe I'd misheard. But the truth is, when something inside you breaks, you don't argue with it. You just listen to the sound it makes. I spent the next week fixing small things not because they needed fixing, but because I needed to stay moving. The porch step, the mailbox, the squeaky door hinge. Each nail I hammered and sounded like punctuation in a sentence I didn't want to finish. Then, 3 days before Christmas, Nathan called. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice careful. "Emily and I might come a bit late. We've been looking at some houses closer to the city. There's one we really like near the lake." "That's nice," I said. "You two deserve a good place." He paused. "Yeah, the only thing is, we've been thinking, maybe you could move in with us later. It's a lot to manage out there on your own." I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "I appreciate that, son, but I'm fine here." He didn't push. Just said we'll talk more when we get there. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. The idea of being a burden, that's a quiet ache no one prepares you for. The house felt especially big that night. Every creak sounded like a question. Every gust of wind outside felt like something trying to get in. I made a pot of coffee, even though it was too late for caffeine. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar. I thought about Clara again, how she'd hum while stirring the sugar, how she'd always insist on using the chipped mug with daisies on it. It's strange, the things you remember when everything else starts to fade. Christmas morning came with snow gentle, slow, like time itself was walking softly. The kind of snow Clara used to love. I set the table for 3. I baked the pie. I waited. The clock ticked past noon. Then past 2, at 3 o'clock, I finally got a text from Nathan. "Hey Dad, we're so sorry. Got tied up with something. We'll come tomorrow. Merry Christmas. Love you." I sat there, staring at the message, feeling the warmth of the pie fading, the house colder somehow. Outside, the snow kept falling beautiful, careless, and infinite. I whispered softly to no one, "Merry Christmas, son." Then I blew out the candles and watched the smoke curl upward like memory itself. The morning after Christmas was quieter than usual, not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, the kind that feels like something has ended. The table was still set, plates untouched, the pie half eaten by no one. I didn't have the heart to clear it right away. It felt like erasing evidence of hope. I made myself coffee and sat by the window. The snow outside was blindingly white, untouched since last night. No footprints. No tire marks. No sign of my son's car coming up the old drive. Funny how you can look at a scene like that so beautiful, so still, and feel nothing but hollow. When Clara was alive, we never missed a Christmas together. Even when Nathan was little and the farm work ran late, she'd keep the lights on, the fire burning, the smell of cinnamon and pine wrapping the house like warmth itself. She believed in traditions not because of the rituals, but because she said they hold us together when everything else changes. And now I saw how right she was, because when traditions stop, the seams start to come apart. I ate a slice of the pie alone. The crust was too thick this time. I'd forgotten how Clara used to brush it with milk before baking, but it didn't matter. It was something to chew on while I thought. Nathan had always been kind even as a boy. He was quiet, curious, never caused much trouble, But when Clara got sick, I saw him change in ways I couldn't stop. He became cautious, distant, the kind of man who measures his words before speaking, like he's afraid of saying the wrong thing. After she passed, we barely talked about her. I tried once, sitting on the porch, telling him how much she would have loved to see the garden bloom again that spring. He just nodded, eyes down. Yeah, Dad, she really would have, and that was it. We never opened that door again. Maybe that's when we started losing each other, quietly, like snow melting under sunlight, slow, unnoticed until it's gone. That afternoon, I bundled up and walked down the long driveway to the mailbox. The cold bit through my gloves, but I welcomed it. At least it made me feel something real. There were a few envelopes inside, bills, advertisements, and one from the county tax office. I glanced at it, sighed, and tucked it under my arm. On the walk back, I stopped halfway to look at the house. It stood there the way it always had, white siding, green shutters, the old maple tree out front leaning slightly from the wind. But I saw it differently that day. Not as my home, but as a chapter I'd been rereading too long. The thought scared me, and yet somewhere deep inside it also felt peaceful. Inside, I set the mail on the counter, poured myself more coffee, and opened the tax envelope. The numbers blurred. Property taxes had gone up again, not by much, but enough to remind me that the world outside doesn't stop for your memories. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the wind moving through the trees. It sounded like whispers, not words, just the soft language of time passing by. I thought of Clara. I thought of Nathan and Emily, probably sitting in their new house by the lake, laughing, planning their future. And I thought of myself sitting in this big, echoing place, guarding things no one else wanted anymore. Around midnight, I got up and went to the attic. The air up there smelled like dust and cedar and old winters. Boxes lined the walls, photos, letters, holiday decorations, things too sentimental to throw away but too heavy to carry forward. I found one labeled Clara Keepsakes. Inside were small, ordinary miracles. Her favorite scarf, a note she'd written me once, tucked inside a birthday card, and an old Polaroid of us standing on this very porch, the year we bought the house. On the back, in her handwriting, she'd written, "Home is wherever we're kind to each other." I sat there on the wooden floor holding that photo, and I think that's when something inside me shifted. Maybe I'd been keeping this place alive out of habit, not love. Maybe I'd been waiting for a family that existed only in memory. Maybe the kindest thing I could do for myself, for Nathan, was to let go. The next morning, I called a realtor. Her name was Sarah. She sounded surprised when I told her I wanted to list the property. "You sure, Mr. Whitman?" she asked. "It's been in your name nearly 40 years. "I'm sure," I said. "I just think it's time." She offered to come by that afternoon. When she arrived, she was younger than I expected, maybe in her 30s. Warm smile, calm eyes. She took off her snow boots at the door and said softly, "Beautiful home you've got here." I nodded it was. She walked through each room with quiet respect, taking notes, snapping photos. When she reached the living room, she paused by the fireplace. "Mind if I ask why you're selling?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "Because every time I look around, I see ghosts that deserve to rest." She didn't ask more, just nodded kindly. When she left, I sat in Clara's chair again, looking out the window at the field beyond the house. The snow was melting now, revealing patches of earth beneath. The kind of slow, reluctant surrender that happens every spring. A week later, she called back. "We've had some interest," she said. "Would you like me to put the sign up?" "Yes," I said. "Go ahead." She hesitated. "You want to be there when we do it?" "No," I said quietly. "Just send me a photo." When I hung up, I realized how calm I felt. No fear, no sadness, just calm, the kind that comes after a storm you didn't know you'd survived. That night, I wrote Nathan an email. Not to tell him what I was doing, just to talk. The way fathers do, when they still believe words can build bridges. "Hey, son, I hope you and Emily are settling in all right. The holidays were quiet here, but peaceful. Your mom would have loved the snow this year," soft as her voice used to be. "I've been thinking a lot about life lately, about how sometimes we stay in places not because they're right, but because they're familiar. Don't worry about me. I'm okay. I'm learning to travel light." I signed it "Love, Dad," like always, and hit send. He didn't reply that night. He didn't reply the next day either, and that was okay. I'd stopped expecting quick answers from the world. A few days later, Sarah sent the photo, the for sale sign standing in the front yard, half buried in snow. It looked strange at first, out of place, like a flag planted in memory. But the longer I looked, the more it made sense. Everything has its season, even the things we thought would never end. I printed the photo and pinned it to the fridge, not as a reminder of loss but of motion, of choosing peace over waiting for someone else's kindness. That night, I dreamed of Clara again. She was sitting by the window, the light catching her hair the way it used to. She looked at me and smiled, that knowing smile of hers that could cut right through your worry. In the dream, she said one sentence, "You've done enough, Frank." When I woke up, the morning light was soft, golden, kind, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone, just ready. The first call came a week later. Nathan's name flashed on the screen early in the morning before the sun had even climbed over the trees. For a second, I considered not answering, not out of anger, just a strange kind of fatigue. The kind that comes from conversations you already know the shape of. But I picked up anyway. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice bright, too bright, like someone trying to sound cheerful after bad news. "You busy today?" "Not particularly," I said. "Why, well, we thought we'd come by, just for the afternoon. Emily wants to bring some of those cookies you like." I could hear traffic behind him, the city, alive and loud, spilling into the quiet of my kitchen. "That sounds nice," I said. "I'll make coffee." When I hung up, I stared at the counter where the for sale photo still sat pinned under a magnet. The sign had gone up 3 days ago. The snow had melted just enough for the earth to look raw and new again, like the land itself was breathing after holding its breath all winter. I walked out to the porch, hands in my pockets, and looked toward the road. The tire ruts from Sarah's last visit were still there, cutting through the soft ground. For a long while, I just stood there, listening to the wind. It wasn't bitter anymore. It was gentle, almost forgiving. When Nathan's car finally pulled in, I saw Emily in the passenger seat, sunglasses on even though the sky was overcast. She waved small, polite, distant. Nathan got out first. He looked around the property like he always did, scanning, assessing, the way a man does when he's trying to make something practical out of something sacred. "Hey, Dad," he said, forcing a smile. "You look good." I chuckled. "Well, I'm still standing." He hugged me. It wasn't the awkward kind this time. It lingered a little longer, almost sincere. Inside, Emily unpacked a tin of cookies, chattering about some new job offer, about how the market was crazy lately. I listened, nodded, smiled in all the right places. She poured herself coffee and sat by the window. "You've still got a great view here," she said, "just gorgeous." I smiled faintly. "Yes, it's always been peaceful." Nathan took off his jacket and joined her. "So, Dad," he said casually, "you've been doing okay. House isn't too much to handle." I looked at him, really looked. The way you look at someone you love and realize you barely recognize who they've become. He had his mother's eyes, still gentle when he forgot to guard them. "It's a lot quieter than it used to be." I said, "But quiet isn't the worst thing in the world." He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. We talked for a while about the weather, the neighbors, small things that don't hurt to say aloud. But beneath every word, I could feel the same unease humming, like static between stations. After an hour, Emily excused herself to take a call outside. I watched her step onto the porch, pacing, her voice low, her expression somewhere between calculation and boredom. Nathan looked down at his coffee. "Dad," he said, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Go ahead." He hesitated. "You remember when I mentioned maybe moving you closer to us? That wasn't just talk. We really think it's for the best. You'd be around people, you'd have us nearby. You wouldn't have to worry about taking care of all this." He gestured vaguely at the house, the walls, the years. I nodded. "I appreciate that, son. I really do." He smiled, relieved. "Good. I'm glad you see it that way, because we actually—" Before he could finish, Emily came back inside. Her voice was calm, but her face had gone pale. "Nathan," she said, "you might want to step outside for a second." He frowned. "Why, what's wrong?" She held up her phone, showing him something. He looked, blinked twice, and then looked at me. "Dad," he said quietly, "why is there a sold sign in front of the house?" I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling the soft ticking of the clock fill the silence between us. He stared at me, as if waiting for me to say it was a mistake. Emily crossed her arms. the tin of cookies forgotten on the counter. Finally, I spoke, because I sold it. The room went still. Nathan's voice softened, but there was a tremor in it. You sold it, without even telling me. I nodded. Yes, Dad, this is your home, our home. Why would you? Emily cut in, her tone sharper. Wait, when did this happen? Last week, I said. The paperwork's already in motion. Nathan rubbed his temples. Dad, I don't understand. What's going on? You love this place. I looked out the window at the maple tree, its bare branches swaying gently in the wind. I did, I said, for a long time, but love changes, son. Sometimes it turns into something else, something quieter. He sighed, sitting down heavily. You could have told me. I know. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. You're mad, aren't you, about what Emily said that night? For the first time I met his gaze fully, so he knew. Maybe he'd known all along. I heard it. I said softly, but no, I'm not mad. I was for a little while, but mostly I just felt tired. He dropped his eyes to the floor. She didn't mean it, Dad. She was frustrated. I should have stopped her. I smiled faintly. Maybe she did mean it. Maybe that's okay. Life's too short to keep people where they don't want to be. Emily stood by the doorway, her arms still crossed, eyes darting between us. I didn't mean it like that, she said quietly. It was just a hard day. We were stressed. I shouldn't have said it. I nodded. I know, and I forgive you. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Nathan leaned forward. So where will you go, Dad? I'm not sure yet. I said, somewhere smaller, maybe near the coast. I've always wanted to wake up and hear the ocean. He laughed softly in disbelief. The ocean, you hate sand. I smiled. Maybe I'll learn to like it. He looked at me for a long time, and I saw something in his expression shift, confusion giving way to something gentler. Maybe understanding. Maybe grief. Finally, he said, I wish you'd told me. I know. I said again, but you've got your own life now. You and Emily have dreams to chase. I didn't want to be another thing you had to manage. Emily spoke, her tone quieter now. We didn't mean to make you feel like that. I know you didn't, I said, but sometimes feelings happen whether anyone means them or not. We sat in silence after that, the kind that isn't empty, just full of things no one can quite say. Outside, a car passed down the road, and for a moment its reflection caught in the window light, flashing across the sold sign like a slow blink from time itself. Nathan finally stood. So that's it, then? You're really leaving? I nodded. Yes, I think Clara would have wanted me to. He swallowed hard, then reached out his hand. I took it, and for a moment we just stood there, two men connected by everything that's both said and unsaid. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. You'll call me, right, wherever you end up? Of course, I said softly, but don't worry, I'll be fine. They left a little while later. Emily hugged me, awkward, hesitant, but I could feel it was genuine. Nathan hugged me twice, the second time tighter than the first. I watched their car pull away, the sound of gravel fading into distance. The sun was setting low, painting the sky in soft gold and blue. I stood there for a long time, watching until they were gone. Then I turned back toward the house, looked at the sold sign at the edge of the yard, and felt something inside me settle, not sadness, not joy, just stillness. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone, not for an apology, not for a visit, not for time to rewind itself. I was simply here, and that somehow felt enough. The next morning the house felt different, not heavier or sadder, just quieter in a way that didn't ache anymore, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the pale winter sun stretch across the snow. The sold sign stood at the end of the driveway, tilting slightly from the wind, a bright slash of color against the white. It was real now, and strangely, that was comforting. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. No phone call to expect, no visit to prepare for, no ghosts to chase around empty rooms, just life plain and unhurried. I started packing that afternoon. Not the frantic kind of packing people do when they're running away, but the kind you do when you're ready to bless each thing you own goodbye. Clara's books were the hardest. She'd underlined her favorite lines in pencil, neat little notes in the margins. Words like hope, faith, and gentleness circled softly, as if she'd been whispering to the page itself. I ran my thumb along one line from her old poetry book, Mary Oliver, I think it was. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, let it go. Three small words that take a lifetime to understand. I packed the books into a box labeled Clara's, not because I was giving them away, but because I needed to carry her with me lightly. She'd have wanted that. The next room I tackled was Nathan's old bedroom. It still looked like the late '90s baseball posters, a lamp shaped like a rocket, a few dusty trophies from school. I stood there for a long while, remembering how he used to sprawl across the floor doing homework, asking questions about everything under the sun. "Dad," he'd say, "why do leaves change color? Because even trees know how to let go gracefully." I'd answer, half joking. He'd laugh, roll his eyes, but I'd catch him smiling later when he thought I wasn't looking. I found one of his old notebooks in a drawer. The first page had his handwriting, uneven and eager. "When I grow up, I want to build things like Dad." I sat down on the edge of his bed and smiled. Children always start by wanting to be us, and somewhere along the way, they teach us how to be human again. I closed the notebook gently and slipped it into my bag. A small reminder that love, no matter how tangled, never disappears, it just changes form. As the days passed, the boxes stacked up in the living room. Books, photos, a few dishes, tools from the garage. Not much, really. You don't realize how little you need until you start letting go. One evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, I sat by the fireplace for what I knew would be the last time. The flames cracked softly, painting the walls in gold. I could almost hear Clara's voice again, her laugh, her humming while she folded laundry, the way she used to say, "You always stare at fires like they're telling you secrets." Maybe they do. I thought about the years, all the noise, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet dinners, and how all of it had led here to this moment of peace that had taken a lifetime to earn. Later that night, I went through the old photo albums, Nathan's first birthday, Clara standing in the garden, dirt on her hands, pride in her smile. The three of us on the porch one summer evening, sunlight pouring behind us. We looked happy, and we were, not because life was perfect, but because we didn't need it to be. When I closed the last album, I whispered softly, "Thank you." To the house, to Clara, to the years that made me, and the ones that broke me just enough to make room for grace. The next morning, Sarah the realtor came by with the final paperwork. She was kind enough to help me with a few boxes. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said, resting one hand on the doorframe. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly it feels right." She nodded, smiling. "You're lucky, you know. Most people never know when to move on." I looked around the room, the empty walls, the echoes of laughter that seemed to live in the wood. I stayed long enough to listen. I said quietly, "That's how I knew." After she left, I stepped out onto the porch one last time. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and thawing soil. The sky stretched wide and endless above the fields. I could hear the distant hum of a car somewhere down the road, the rustle of branches, the steady rhythm of my own breath. And for the first time, it all sounded like music. That night, I slept on the couch, wrapped in one of Clara's quilts. The fire burned low, whispering softly to itself. I dreamed again of her standing by the ocean, smiling, waving me closer. When I woke, dawn had already touched the horizon. The first light fell across the floorboards, painting everything in gold and forgiveness. I made one last pot of coffee. I drank it slowly, watching the steam curl and vanish into the air. Before I locked the door, I took a long look around. Every corner held a memory. Every shadow felt gentle, like it was saying goodbye too. Then I whispered the only words that felt right, "Thank you for being my home," and I stepped outside. The sold sign gleamed in the morning light. I brushed my hand across it not as a farewell, but as a blessing. Then I got into my truck, turned the key, and started down the long driveway. The road ahead was narrow, the kind that disappears around slow bends and invites you to keep going just to see where it leads. The kind of road Clara would have loved. As the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, I didn't feel loss. Just space, and within that space, a quiet kind of peace that felt like home all over again. I drove for most of the day, through towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by time gas stations with faded signs, diners with the same blue coffee cups they'd probably used for decades, and fields that rolled endlessly under the late winter sky. I didn't have a plan, just a direction, west, toward the water, toward something that felt like breathing again. Every few miles, I'd pass families loading groceries, kids running after stray basketballs, couples walking their dogs. And I realized something simple: life keeps moving, no matter who stays behind. It doesn't wait for anyone to catch up. By evening, I reached a small coastal town I'd never seen before. The kind with a single main street, a pier that creaked when the tide changed, and a handful of weathered houses facing the sea. I found a modest cottage for rent, white shutters, chipped paint, a porch that looked out at the horizon. The woman who owned it was in her 70s, soft-spoken, with kind eyes. She handed me the keys without asking many questions. "People come here to heal," she said simply. "You'll like it." She was right. That first night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the waves breathe in and out. The air was colder by the ocean, sharp, clean, almost new. It carried the faint scent of salt and pine, like nature's own kind of forgiveness. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill me. The rhythm of the sea felt like Clara's heartbeat, steady and eternal. For days, I hardly spoke to anyone. I'd wake early, brew a small pot of coffee, and walk along the beach as the sun rose. Sometimes I'd collect small stones or pieces of driftwood, not for keeping, but for holding and letting go again. It became a quiet ritual, a way to remind myself that everything beautiful eventually returns to the water. One afternoon, I found a small cafe by the dock. The owner, a man named Tom, must have been around my age. He poured me a cup of coffee and nodded toward the sea. "You new around here?" "Just passing through," I said. He smiled, that knowing kind of smile only people who have seen enough life can wear. "Funny," he said. "That's what we all say at first." We talked for a while about fishing, the storms that came in off the bay, the tourists who never stayed long enough to understand the place. When I left, he waved and said, "See you tomorrow." And he was right about that too. It didn't take long for the days to find a rhythm: mornings by the sea, afternoons reading by the window, evenings filled with the sound of waves against the rocks and gulls calling above the dark water. The stillness that used to scare me began to feel like company, and sometimes, when the sun dipped low and painted everything gold, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason at all. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Nathan. He didn't say much, just a few lines about how he and Emma had come by the old house, only to find it empty. He wrote, "I wish we'd talked before you left. I didn't understand how much that place meant to you. I hope you're okay, Dad." I sat with that letter for a long time. Not sad, not angry, just still. He was trying in his own way, and that was enough. I wrote back simply, "I'm well, son. The sea has a way of teaching peace. Take care of each other. That's all that matters." I didn't expect a reply, and maybe that was the point. Some words don't need echoes, they just need to be released. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Spring brought the sound of rain against the roof, and with it, a quiet kind of rebirth. The garden outside the cottage started to bloom wildflowers, yellow and purple, weaving through the stones. I built a small bench there, facing the water, where I could sit in the evenings with Clara's old poetry book. Sometimes I'd read aloud softly, letting the words drift into the wind. Other times I'd just listen to the waves, to the gulls, to the silence that had once felt heavy but now felt whole. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe Nathan would visit one day, maybe he wouldn't. But I'd stopped waiting for life to return to what it was, because somewhere between the letting go and the quiet mornings, I'd realized something I'd missed all along. We don't lose the people we love. We carry them forward in the gentlest ways, in how we breathe, in what we notice, in the small mercies we learn to give, and maybe that's enough. Sometimes, when the light fades and the sky blushes into dusk, I look out at the horizon and think about that Christmas night, about what was whispered and what was lost, and how strangely it all led me here. If I'd stayed, maybe I'd still be angry, but by leaving, I found the kind of peace no house could hold. I still miss them, of course. I miss the noise, the warmth of family, the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. But I've come to see that love isn't always meant to stay under the same roof. Sometimes it just needs space to breathe, like the tide pulling away, only to return in another form. As I sit here now, watching the water move under the fading sun, I whisper a small prayer of gratitude for the years that shaped me, for the home that held me, for the silence that finally set me free, and maybe in the end, love isn't about keeping people, it's about remembering them kindly even from a distance. The waves roll in, the wind hums through the reeds, and somewhere deep inside, I feel it, that soft, forgiving peace that comes when you finally learn to let go.